Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Okay, Dave said I am researching Cornish swimming, but in fact this morning I'm going to talk about a Devon swimmer. Fred Holman, who won the gold medal at the in the 200 metres breaststroke in the 1908 Olympics. What I want to look at this morning is the extent to which that Holman had agency in his swimming career. And to what extent his Olympic success was actually something that was manufactured and actually something that he didn't really have a great deal of control over. Because my contention is that what we have with Fred Holman is a very carefully manufactured construction of him as a paradigm of the amateur sporting hero. And in this presentation I'm going to contend that he was a product of a very specific set of conditions to the time and place that provided the background to his career. I think to start with, that he was the embodiment of an ideological and political will to power, almost between the national governing body and the regional governing bodies, the emerging regional governing bodies at the time, and the rival swimming clubs in Exeter. The influence and patronage of the officers of those governing bodies and the clubs, which saw him as a means of promoting their own agenda. The trajectory of his swimming career closely parallels in the water the rise to power of influential officials of the Exeter club in the committee room. Another factor was the sort of quasi-colonial relationship, we can put it like that, between Exeter and Dawlish, which was uniquely shaped through middle-class bathing customs and protocols over quite a long period historically. And related to that was the class differences between Dawlish and Exeter, and as Holman being framed as an aspirational role model, a figure that all classes could identify with. The other factor in all of this was the role of the press, which I think was particularly significant at a time when there was a great deal of social and political change happening in Exeter, in the city. The press was instrumental in promoting swimming as a more egalitarian pursuit and actually as a means of social control. So, moving on to the next slide. I'm not going to stay on this one very long, but what we have here is a quote from an account of Holman coming back from the Olympics when he arrived not to one but to two civic receptions. He was hauled off the train in Exeter by a massive crowd of people, carried to the Guildhall with brass bands playing "See the Conquering Hero Comes," and subjected to a full-scale civic reception, mayor, dignitaries, great and the good, and thousands of people. He then managed to get back on the train and go to Dawlish, which is where his family lived, and the same thing happened to him there. The station was swamped with people who hauled him off the train and repeated the whole thing over and over again. Now, when he was in Exeter, one of the things that happened, one of the things that was singled out in one of these reports was as he came off the train, it says here, the young fellow who wore a white cap bearing the Union Jack looked in perfect condition, and he wore a smile almost of bashfulness as the crowd jostled each other in order to grip his hand. And he was looking for a person, he was looking for a particular person in that huge crowd, and it was his mother. And as the Western Times said, it was an incident which had a moving effect. Now, I think that what this is all about is part of that construction of Frederick that went with his loyalty to his birthplace, was deeply rooted within family values, respect for family, solid family values, which are, after all, class values. And this went with the respect for values of sportsmanship, respect for his opponents, respect for the officials and the rules of the game, not just being in there for the winning. And yeah, so that, sorry, I should have moved on to the next one. So, this is Dawlish, where Fred Holman grew up. And as you can see, you probably know Dawlish because it's the place where the sea wall got breached a couple of years ago and brought the railway line down. This is Dawlish, where Fred Holman grew up. And in Dawlish, the annual swimming matches that they had there used to be held in the sea, as you can see. And with its origins for those matches being in prizes offered for Exeter and Dawlish gentlemen amateurs in 1864, Dawlish can claim to be the first coastal town in Devon to institute annual swimming matches. Exeter followed with its own in 1865, and these became part of a circuit of annuals in the west of England, which by the 1880s, the heyday of the travelling professionals, were attracting all the crack swimmers down to the far west from all over the country to compete alongside local swimmers for money prizes in front of huge crowds. Thousands of people came to these events. In Dawlish, as in the other towns on the circuit, Exeter, Teignmouth and Plymouth in Devon, and Penzance and St Ives in Cornwall, participation in the annuals was also a recognised rite of passage for young boys, local boys and youths. And Frederick Holman, the fifth of 7 sons and 3 daughters, grew up seeing his older brothers competing in these matches. So he swam in his first swimming match at the Dawlish Annuals in 1894 at the age of 11, and then the following year he made his first appearance at the Exeter Annuals. Now they were held in the river. They're the only ones out of the whole circuit that weren't held in the sea. They were held in the river at the Headweir bathing ground, which is right in the centre of Exeter. That had been a sort of customary bathing place since the 1820s, a very popular place for boys, youths, men, and later women as well. Thousands of people used it every year. In fact, in the height of the season, thousands of people were using it every week. Mainly working class people, and a lot of working class Exeter kids learned to swim at the Headweir bathing ground. The river here is particularly prone to flooding, and in some years it is opposite, low river levels, both of which interfered with the course and led to the annuals being subject to postponement. As happened, to give you some idea of the problem this caused, it happened 3 times in 4 years between 1888 and 1891, so just before Holman started. And as Exeter's urban expansion and inadequate sanitation brought increased pressure on the river, a combination of sewage and low water levels due to water being abstracted for drinking water raised increasing concerns about the state of the bathing ground during this period. As a direct result of these concerns, a company was formed to build the swimming baths in Exeter, the first swimming baths in the southwest, which opened in 1893. The very baths which Holman would allegedly contract, where Holman would allegedly contract typhoid 10 years later. Although the annuals continued to be held in Headweir when conditions allowed, right up to the outbreak of the First World War. The West of England circuit had been too remote and peripheral to receive much attention from the national body, the Amateur Swimming Association, until 1891, when the ASA devolved its regulatory powers to a 3-district structure, one of which was the Southern Counties. And within a few weeks of being created, the Southern Counties Amateur Swimming Association was exerting pressure on all the organisations which constituted the West of England circuit to affiliate to the ASA and to adopt its amateur code. And this campaign was driven by the Southern Counties appointed officer for Devon and Cornwall, so the area covering this area that the circuit was operating in, who was called CWJ, Charles W.J. Bartlett, who was a prominent member of the Exeter Club. And through Bartlett, the club had a close relationship with the press. He himself was a journalist. In fact, he took part in the races for members of the local press, which were a feature of the Exeter Annuals between 1889 and 1892. And the press, the Exeter press particularly, became a willing mouthpiece for the campaign to persuade clubs to affiliate to the ASA. There's a slide there that added something about that, but that's disappeared. The Cornish associations held out resolutely against the imposition of the amateur code. In Devon, there was a mixed response. The Plymouth Club declined to affiliate and continued for some years with its Cornish counterparts in Penzance and St Ives to promote races with big money prizes for professionals alongside the races for local swimmers. By contrast, not surprisingly given Bartlett's influence, the Exeter Club affiliated within weeks, having persuaded its members that the advantages of affiliation would enable members to compete in open races held under the Amateur Swimming Association laws in any part of Great Britain and afford opportunities to the leading amateurs in the kingdom to compete at its own annual matches at the Head Weir. And this decision to affiliate was promptly rewarded by the ASA with granting the Exeter Club the 1891 half-mile Amateur Championship of England. However, members of affiliated clubs were barred from swimming in events organised by non-affiliated clubs, and within weeks we find the Southern Counties Executive taking action, harsh disciplinary action, against Exeter Club members for competing in unregistered meetings elsewhere in Devon. The sort of quasi-colonial power relations between the committees of the respective Exeter and Dawlish clubs and the dependence of the Dawlish annuals on the participation of Exeter swimmers really to make their events viable meant that when Exeter affiliated to the Amateur Swimming Association in February 1891, the Dawlish Swimming Club had little alternative but to follow. And this sort of reinforced this subaltern role of the Dawlish Club to the Exeter Club and strengthened the positions of power and influence of Exeter committee members on the executive body of the Southern Counties ASA. Continuing dissatisfaction with the lack of local decision making within the Southern Counties, which stretched right from the end of Cornwall right over to Kent and included the powerful nexus of amateur clubs in London. So you can see how removed Devon felt itself from that sort of centre of power. And that led in September 1896 to the formation of a county ASA, Devon ASA, with C.W.J. Bartlett as its honorary secretary and another Exeter official, the solicitor A.J. Tucker, as its representative on the ASA executive. This was not quite the home rule for Devon and absolute power that the newspapers of the time represented it, but through the election of its officers to important roles, it further consolidated the power base for the Exeter Club to widen its sphere of influence. In the next few years, Bartlett and Tucker were at the forefront of those agitating for further devolution for the West, which was eventually achieved in 1901 with the implementation of the ASA's 5-district scheme and the creation of the Western Counties ASA, which comprised Devon, Cornwall, Dorset, Somerset, Wiltshire and Gloucestershire. And both men, Tucker and Bartlett, would go on to achieve high positions in the national governing body. Tucker, in fact, was president of the ASA in 1902. Holman and Rowe, quite early on in his career, there's evidence that Holman had joined the Exeter Club, although then he was still living in Dawlish. And if the club had any residential restrictions on membership at the time, it appears that they may have waived them for him to join. In June 1899, the Exeter Gazette was writing, "Dawlish should be proud of the swimming Holman's showing in the Exeter Championships, for although he's now residing permanently in Exeter, the people of Dawlish look upon him as one of their own." To the Western Times, he'd already been appropriated by them as the ex-Dawlish youth. And we know that from the 1901 census that he was in fact living in Exeter by that time. And there were push and pull factors at work in this relocation. In Dawlish, obviously his practice, his ability to get in the water to swim, was restricted by the weather and sea conditions to the months between May and October. But in Exeter, like every other member of the Exeter Swimming Club, he had regular access for practice to the baths, which they didn't have in Dawlish, which were reserved for the club, the swimming club, 2 evenings a week. And also the Exeter Club organised a series of swimming galas and championships at the Baths, as well as at the Headweir bathing ground, in addition to its annual. So as well as regular practice and an extended season, Holman was his move to Exeter was enabling him to access increased opportunities for competition as well. In 1898, for the first time, he encountered in a race the then Exeter champion W.J. Rowe. Rowe was slightly younger than Holman, and very favoured by the press. You've had time to look at what's up there, and I'm not going to go through any of it. But as you can see from that, Rowe is in the mid 1890s. He's been represented as a good prospect, somebody who is the favourite of Amphibious, the swimming correspondent of the Western Times. But by the time you get to 1900, that balance has shifted. It very clearly shifts in the course of one season, in the course of one race even. And after that, you have this situation where the pair of them are set up in a sort of binary opposition to each other, where all the positive qualities start being attributed to Holman, and the more negative qualities, like this one, for instance, it starts out by congratulating Holman, well done, FH. But look at what it says about Rowe here. I heard a gentleman yesterday that he was prepared to give 7-2 on Rowe, and Rowe gets associated here entirely, without any justification, with betting. An amateur swimmer being associated by just by the person who's been betted on, with a practice that is something that the amateur rules just is completely outside the rules. So that's how you see that shift. At the same time, there was a conflict going on between the Exeter club and the Headweir swimming club, both of which had very similar objectives. They were both very much about encouraging youngsters to swim. But the Headweir club was more traditional in its values, and what it wanted to see was the retention of professional swimming matches. And in fact, it even gave small prizes, as sort of small financial money prizes, as inducements to youngsters, in order to try and persuade them to take part in the races. The Exeter Swimming Club accused the Headweir Club of professionalising youngsters, and again by association, because Rowe was closely associated with the Headweir Club. He was a working class lad who'd learned to swim there. He was still very closely involved with the people who ran that club. Again by association, he became tainted with values inconsistent with those of amateurism at exactly the time that Holman was being constructed through the press around those very values. So when in 1899, in a series of races at the Baths and Headweir, Holman beat Rowe for the club championship, this is when you get Amphibious here saying, he's as genuine a sportsman there ever was, and I must congratulate him on beating my favourite, WJ. The seesaw has definitely tipped at that point. The stage was set. Oh, sorry, there is one other thing I wanted to say about that. A profile of Holman written in the published in the Western Daily Mail in September in 1900, which was probably written by C.W.J. Bartlett himself, who worked for the Western Morning News, praised his sportsmanlike qualities and tellingly his cooperation with officials, of how he never complained about handicapping, about the handicaps he received in races, and always did his best. And this phrase, always did his best, is just a trope that runs through the whole narrative of Holman's swimming career from now on.
2 minutes.
Okay. We haven't even got to the Olympics yet. So what I will do here, so in the summer of 1900, the stage was set for a series of races, a series of head-to-head races between Holman and Rowe, and it was really going to be the showdown to see who was the better swimmer. But in July of that year, very arbitrarily, club officials changed the eligibility rules for the city members race, which Rowe, as did many others, felt had been done deliberately to prevent him from taking the first prize. And this was a scratch race, and it was seen as the test of who was the best swimmer. After it had discontinued professional races in 1895, most of Exeter's club races, even championships, were swum as handicaps. And while that made for an exciting finish for spectators, they were generally acknowledged as favouring those swimmers receiving handicaps rather than those who had to start somewhere behind. So many times the better swimmer failed to make up his handicap and qualify for the final. And what that meant really was that the result of races was largely determined by the standard of the handicapping. And in whose hands was the handicapping? Well, it was, of course, the hands of the ASA appointed officials. That dispute between Rowe and the Exeter officials ran on throughout the summer, and in fact the actual race took place without Rowe, and inevitably Holman won it. The structural impact of the Western Counties ASA can best be seen through the emergence and development of water polo and swimming club swimming leagues, which strengthened the status and role of clubs as gatekeepers and in policing the regulatory framework. In 1901, Rowe, who played water polo for the Teignmouth club, was accused of inducing others to defect from the Exeter club to play for rival teams, a charge he denied. Within a month, the Exeter club had introduced a rule giving it first claim on its members. Smaller clubs, which attempted to improve their competitiveness by amalgamating, as Dawlish and Teignmouth did in 1901 for the purposes of playing in the Western Counties Water Polo League, found their applications for affiliation to the Western Counties turned down by the Exeter-dominated Devon County ASA. No such conflict of club loyalties ever appeared to have been raised against Holman, who continued to swim and play water polo for both Dawlish and Exeter, apparently with the connivance of both the Devon Association and the Western Counties Association. And Holman remained a member of Dawlish Swimming Club throughout his career, and in fact within weeks of that appeal, we find him and Rowe actually playing in the same winning Devon and Teignmouth United Swimming Club team after they'd appealed and the appeal had been upheld in a relay race in the Devon Counties Swimming Championship. So paradoxically, Holman's commitment to Dawlish through thick and thin, which became part of the construction of him as the epitome of the club swimmer, here is working against his rival Rowe. Meanwhile, Rowe's difficulties with officialdom continued, and a charge of professionalism was next brought against him in September 1901, which again couldn't be proved. Yeah. Okay. I'll just finish then. This one that's fine. The development of water polo and flying squadron leagues, relay leagues, provided extended opportunity for swimmers to travel further afield to compete against clubs outside their immediate locality. This put financial pressure on smaller clubs they could little afford. Economic viability rather than the success of their teams in the water became critical factors in whether smaller clubs could compete in these leagues. Teignmouth was forced to withdraw from the Western Counties ASA Water Polo League in 1904 because of the cost of travelling to away fixtures. Well-connected and influential clubs like Exeter could negotiate deals with the railway companies who paid third-class rail fares for teams to travel from Exeter as far as Gloucester, Cheltenham, Bristol, Weston-super-Mare and Taunton. This, together with the continuing resistance of the Cornish associations against affiliation with the Western Counties ASA, led to a reorientation of the geography of competitive swimming in the far southwest, away from the coastal east-west axis of the old professional-dominated circuit, defined by the line of the Great Western Railway between Exeter and Penzance, to a north-south inland axis. That's the finish.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll give you part 2 next year.